she'd respond, she would be there.
Oh, and Jennifer just entered the waiting room. So, and you
Okay.
all are live, ready to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, tree board meeting about the Wildland urban interface. Chief Mitchell, there's a couple of questions that I guess we all have. Mostly I have is about the defensible area and the 10-foot requirement on crowns, because I mean, canopy is very important to keeping the house cool. And if in other areas it talks about trees within the within the 10 feet of electrical lines, where you've got a lot of understory trees that are along the street side that are within that parameter. And I don't know, we got a plan to cut all those down, or?
There's actually, this plan doesn't cut any trees down. The intent,
You have the canopy that is covered, that has to be trimmed back within that defensible area.
let me give you a little history of where this came from. Okay, so the state of Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Forestry Division has been encouraging municipalities across the state to develop some mitigation plans to enhance, public safety and welfare in the case of any type of wildfire. Now, when I say wildfire, I'm not necessarily meaning a California-sized wildfire. We have had some very significant fires up here that have burned several acres on and off the brow. So what we've done, we've looked at environmental safety, public safety, reducing hazards in our wildland urban interface areas of the town. Now, the Department of Agriculture Forestry Division, they have, through our invitation, a couple of years ago, they came into town and did some density maps based on what our risk factors were. They did it, and then we also had a community risk reduction survey done too on what our risk reduction is. One of the things we're proud of is the number of trees in our canopy that we have in the area, and we want to maintain that. And one of the things that the folks from forestry emphasize is this isn't about cutting trees down. What this is, it's about encouraging some mitigation techniques that homeowners can do, or that we can build into future subdivisions as we move forward and grow as a community. So where we got this from was from national standards, codes from the nation, the state of Tennessee, references they come off their Tennessee Firewise and the Burn Safe Tennessee site, which I'm guessing you've all probably been on, considering they interact with tree boards all across the state. And if you look at that, they've got general Firewise information, becoming a Firewise community, home landscaping, building materials. And one of the things that we did in this, we didn't restrict building materials at all. Because if you look at some of the prescriptive wildland interface codes, it greatly restricts what you can use in a building. Roof-wise, you can basically use some type of fire-resistive roofing, being metal or something like that. And we didn't want to go that far. But basically what we want to do is create some minimal guidelines to help us reduce our chances of having any fires and protect residences and peoples, along with looking at the minimal impact to when you talk about trimming the canopy, the recommendation is that you keep the canopy trimmed at 10 feet off your house. 10 feet isn't very far. And over your chimney. That just makes good sense. Chimneys have to have spark arresters on them, which by code they have to have anyway. That's nothing new. That's in the building code. So we already have that. And then it also, through the Firewise, the Burn Safe Tennessee program, residents can go on there and developers and see what plants are recommended plants that are reduce the fuel load to still be within that defensible space, and some that aren't recommended. It doesn't prohibit anything. But what, we dovetailed this with our current codes, our property maintenance code. And also, if you look at the landscape ordinance, and it talks about removing dead wood and brush from property, and that's where it includes too.
How do you define, where is the wildlands urban interface? How do you define that?
Basically, I don't want to read you the definition that's in the definition, but it's an area that, just what it says, it's where the wildland. So if we have a patch of trees and you carve out a place to put a house, that is considered wildland urban interface.
So if I have a 2-acre lot and only half of the acres is cultivated and the rest is woodlands, that is urban, that's wildlife urban interface?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Now
you.
they mainly look at larger areas, and I'll use the Hidden Brook neighborhood as an example, because the Hidden Brook area on the maps that they provided us is a high impact area because it's very wooded. And it has some areas that have some down trees and some dead wood and some other things. So that they look at those areas. If you look at the new subdivision, Danbury subdivision and conservation subdivision, it's got the wooded buffers on each side of the subdivision. Really, that wouldn't, because it's pretty wide open and there's quite a bit of setback in between the trees and the houses. But we have quite a bit of area. The Green Gorge area, houses all along the brow because, the way wildfires burn. We had one earlier this spring that got pretty dangerously close to some houses out on Palisades. And so what we're looking for is to just minimize that.
Chief, I had a question along those lines in that section on 7403, where it does talk about the maps. Are those maps already available or do they still have to be developed?
Well, for areas that we would identify, I'm sorry, I'm turning to that. Areas that we would identify as wildland urban interface areas, we haven't developed that yet. What I have, and I was going to get these out to you, but they're not great maps. And one is the way they sent them to me, that the Department of Agriculture has already produced, and I apologize for these, but these are maps of the town. This is a fire density, or this is actually the risk map.
Okay.
Okay, and then it shows an ignition density map. You can't really see the colors, but anything that's yellow, there's a green area in there, which is a level 1. We're mostly level 4, 5, 6, and 7s. 7's the highest. But so they have already created these maps. Their folks, their foresters and everything have been in town and created these maps already.
So a homeowner at the present time, how would they get a copy of these maps and see where they are in relation to?
What I would like to do is get a better copy of these maps, obviously. And the county has also done maps based on the hazard mitigation plan that the county adopts, and every municipality in the county has to be part of it. So they've done a wildland urban interface assessment too, and it basically follows the same thing as forestry's done. But I'd like to be able to get these, and with the town manager's approval, we can put them up on the website so people can view them.
Okay.
But it's going to be a matter of, I don't want this on the website.
Right.
That's not.
So I guess the broad answer is we have maps available at the present time, but going forward, we will have detailed maps more oriented specifically to our town of Signal Mountain.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think as we move forward too, with your help and direction, if you identify any areas where you think there's a concern, one of the reasons we're doing this is we don't want to have any fires, and we don't want to lose I was just up in Gatlinburg a month ago at a conference, and that fire was several years ago. I was up there during that fire,
Mhm.
and there's areas that are still just very. I mean, it devastated them up there.
Right.
And I'm not talking about structures. I'm talking about their crown. I mean, there's just total bare
yeah.
areas.
Burned what, something like 30,000 acres?
Mm-hmm. So, and this is, so what we have today is what we have today. This isn't a plan to go out and ask people to, trim their trees. What this gives us a guideline that if somebody says, hey, what can I do to reduce the impact? Because insurance companies are really starting to key on this with homeowners, especially in a community of our type. So we want to be able to offer them materials that say, okay, here's some things you can do. And here's some things that maybe you shouldn't do. And, one of the things that I don't agree with or disagree with, but it's one of the recommended things is, don't put your wood pile on a wood deck up against your house. But that's where it's most convenient.
That's what termites.
But we can recommend that, but we're not going to come out and look for your wood pile, and we're not going to bring a tape measure out and measure the canopy of your trees. This is just, that's why we didn't adopt. There is this is actually the actual wildland urban interface code.
Mhm.
This is very restrictive in building materials and everything. Good code, but very restrictive. But what we took, like I said, from forestry and some other places, best practices, and created a new chapter in the existing fire code to help us along here.
Okay, so for those people that have mature trees in their yards, so to speak, right now, and they're close to a woodland area where we do have this interface, then they're not going to really have to go do anything to now. This is more a set of recommendations of what they can do to reduce the potential or propensity for them to be affected by wildland fires from the surrounding area.
Yes, that's correct.
Because I can see people coming to the tree board and asking questions. Okay, we got these rules over here. We have these rules over here. Which ones do we follow, or how do we best try to follow both of them?
And what I'd like to do is the forestry also, let me find it here. And this we can get up on the website too. They have several checklists, if you will. That actually the fire department does what we call life safety home surveys. If you invite us into your home, we have a checklist. It's not an inspection, but we go through and look at things in your home and make recommendations of, maybe you shouldn't stack all your used newspaper up to your water heater, things like that. And so what we're doing, we had just started this about the time the coronavirus hit. So you know how all that has affected everything. But we created this is forestry's form, but we created one for residents, and we'll take a walk around the outside of your residence too and see if they want us to. Again, it's all voluntary, but see where you land in the wildland urban interface. Are there things that you could do, recommendations? So we're including that in our surveys now. But if you look at some other things, and this is all from forestry that we can offer. Again, we can make these available. They have, how to create a defensible space, what to do. And then they also have, which again, some people are going to agree with or not agree with, depending on what you like. There's a couple of trees or shrubs on this list that I know I just planted in my yard. One's a boxwood and one's a mountain laurel, but they're on the more flammable list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they have the less flammable list and the more flammable list. So this is something that we can make available that might help somebody make some landscaping decisions. It didn't, it's not, it doesn't prohibit anything, but it gives some explanation of why, or maybe some planting recommendations if you're going to plant Leland cypresses. We know how they grow. Maybe you don't want to put them 5 feet apart. Maybe you want to put them 10 feet apart because they will grow together. And it just gives some recommendations. And again, this is all from the Department of Agriculture, Division of Forestry. Who's a good-
Eric, is that something you might make a copy of and make available to the tree board?
Oh, absolutely. I can get you anything you want. I can give you all of this, and actually I'll just go ahead and scan it all. And but if you go to, it's burnsafetn.org. Everything that I've shown you is actually on their website too. It's burnsafetn.org.
So that would include the recommended plant list?
Yes.
Okay.
County allows for brush burning from October through April. Will that be impacted by this code?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I didn't.
Okay, the Hamilton County allows brush burning from October through April. Will that be affected by this code?
No, that will not be affected. We follow, as actually part of our current code, we follow, Hamilton County Air Pollution Control and their recommended burning times, whether it's a burn day, not burn day, and size and restrictions on what can be burned.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
If we adopt this code, if the town adopts the code, obviously these things that you've mentioned before, it changes our insurance rating sometimes for the positive. Does it potentially, if a homeowner wasn't following something, is it potentially indemnifying the insurance company that like you weren't following your local code if a house burns because of a wildland fire?
No, there's, and I can't speak for any, but insurance companies usually don't hold a homeowner. I've seen places where a person back where I came from, Illinois, burned $1 million house down because they were cleaning engine parts in their garage next to their propane heater with gasoline. Can't fix that. If somebody does or does not do something and it's not intentional, just because you don't trim your trees, that I don't believe they will hold you at risk for that. I'm not an insurance man, but I've never seen that happen. I've seen people burn leaves before and set their house on fire. And, their insurance companies paid, didn't like it, but they paid.
I think it's important to note that, as Eric said, these are for existing conditions. These are going to become really recommended guidelines and best practices. But I think it's important to note that, right up front, section 401C, retroactivity, it says provisions of this chapter shall apply to conditions arising after the adoption thereof. Conditions not legally in existence at the adoption. So all the stuff that we're talking about is specifically is addressed right there in saying that existing tree canopy, it is what it is. We can take these guidelines and recommendations and make them as that, just as recommendations to folks. You want the tree canopy at least a few feet off of your roof to prevent damage. If you also want to prevent the chance of spreading fire as best possible, make that 10 feet, make it a few more feet above the roof, things like that. So it's, I think that's, as developments come in, subdivisions come in, we have the opportunity to to get them to develop in a way that accomplishes what we want in terms of maintaining the wooded feel, but also doing it so that trees are spaced out enough that they don't create hazards and things like that. But the town as we know it today pretty much could stay as it is. We hope that people will choose to trim back a little bit and protect themselves, but there's nothing that's going to make them do that. It's not the idea. I think it's just important to note that phrasing is in there right up front.
Well, with the developers, talking about new subdivisions, we try to limit them going in and clear cutting just for the canopy of the town and new subdivisions coming in. I mean, the trees are gonna make the property more valuable.
Sure.
Well, if they've got to get them out of the way to build, I mean, they love that. Trust me, the developers would rather go through and just mow everything down and plant little trees. So I think we're fighting against ourselves on this.
Well, I think, there's nothing that says you can't have, where this is, you can have trees, shrubs, plants in your defensible space. There's nothing that says you can't. And I'll use out on Mayapple, all those houses, there was a significant amount of trees that were removed to build those houses. But if you look, the houses or the trees that are around the houses have been, trimmed up nicely and are still there. So the canopies, it was thinned out. There's no doubt about it. But I think that's a good example. Wild Ridge, of course, it's a little different because of the way it was developed. But Mayapple is a good example of that. And this chapter of the fire code is not designed to make any more trees be removed for development than what is already in place.
So Eric, going back to just examples, and if I could use our own property here as an example, we have, of course, a number of mature shade trees. Some of them overhang the house, which is what we like because that gives us shade. We do keep them trimmed back up from the roof, but they still overhang significantly. And we have trunks that are within 10 feet of our home. And if we needed to clear away anything within 30 feet of our house, that puts us on our side property lines with everything cleared. So how would this property, as I've described it to you, be affected by this?
Today it wouldn't.
Yeah, again, as Boyd said earlier, that in the first start of this, what's existing is okay. You're talking about new subdivisions and new buildings. So your house would be okay. And it's a suggestion, which of most of these are, it's not a law from the way I'm reading it. It's a suggestion to keep fire possibility down.
And for your example, you can have all of those plantings in your defensible space. They just have pruning recommendations that, let's say if you have a tree that the canopy starts, let's say it's not over the house, but let's say the canopy starts 15 feet off the ground. Well, you don't want to have shrubs around that tree that are within 3 feet of the canopy. They suggest that you trim them back, to keep a flammable source away from your tree. Does that make sense? They don't want what's called laddering. So your grass starts on fire, then it starts your shrubs on fire, then it starts your trees on fire, and then it starts your house on fire. So we want to prevent laddering. But one of the things with this is, and I look at new developments, whether it be a new single house or a larger development, we'd like to be able to make recommendations. Let's face it, I know I've done it. I love to work in the yard, and there's been things I've planted And then 3 or 4 years after they're planted, I'll say that's probably wasn't the exact right spot for that. And so we'd like to try to help people along. A lot of people use, nurseries and everything, which help them. But sometimes there's trees or bushes that get too big that maybe they shouldn't plant so close to the house. And some of these, again, in the tree and shrub document, that could help somebody along and help prevent that. I'd rather see somebody plant something in the right spot rather than have to tear it out 4 years later, especially if it's a tree. We all like Japanese maples, and where do you plant those? You plant them right up next, closer to your house. I know that's where mine's at. So, but we want to make sure we don't, we want to do the right thing for the citizens and our property, and the right thing for the environment too. This is also about not having brush fires. We just don't want to have any.
Well, I
And
don't think
hopefully
anybody
that helps us
wants that.
prevent that.
But I think it sounds like these are all suggestions. These are all recommendations. They're not law where you can't you can't plant something next to your new home. Is that
Correct.
So
Can we-
I'm struggling.
So wait,
that-
I'm sorry, Ann, can we clarify that or we just leave that? Doesn't that depend on how it's voted in, whether they're suggestions or whether they're codified as far as building regs?
Well, if you look at the name of the code is, wildland urban, or it's not even a code, it's chapter 4 of the Title 7, the Fire Prevention Code, Wildland Urban Interface Fire Prevention. What we're looking for is a prevention measure and with prescriptive recommendations to help us prevent wildfires or brush fires or grass fires or any of those types of things. It's the same reason we have property maintenance codes. It's the same if in the landscape ordinance, under 13-315, it talks about the dead and diseased trees and why we should remove them. So, we already have part of that in our ordinances. And it also talks about the protection of trees in 316. And, as you look through, and I know you all are looking through the landscape ordinance now, but it talks about street trees where you can plant them. It talks about how close you can plant trees next to fire hydrants. It talks about, so this is just the fire prevention side of making sure we do the right things, in our community.
So Eric, I appreciate that you want to protect us from fire. I mean, that's a really good thing. We thank you. I'm struggling a little bit here with the suggestions versus requirements, because throughout the document, I keep seeing shall, and that's not a suggestion.
Well, here's, there are, look, how do I say this? This chapter, if it was adopted, would give us the ability, there are several times a year that we have inquiries about certain things related to this. And because we don't have an avenue to require somebody to do something, we can't do anything about it. That makes sense. So I look at a case, we got a call a few weeks ago about a house here in town, and they've allowed brush to grow up clear around the house. Well, it's not dead, it's green. But there's really nothing we can do about it. And the neighbors are concerned. And so the shalls, we could make it a shall, but we're not going to actively go out and patrol for anything in this. It's no different than a lot of the code. There's a lot of shalls throughout the codes that you don't actively go out and seek out.
But you have the option.
but we have the option. I can't imagine. Well, I'll put it this way. We don't have time to go out and patrol for this. The codes guys can't hardly keep up the way it is. But it gives us another avenue to help mitigate those things.
Right.
Again, if there are existing conditions now, this won't apply unless it constitutes a distinct hazard to life or property. So if a very unusual situation arises that requires us to act on it, this gives us a mechanism to do that. If it doesn't fit within that distinct hazard to life or property, again, it already exists and this isn't going to apply. Down the road, new developments and new scenarios that do arise, then they are shalls there. But unless it reaches that high level of threat or hazard, this doesn't apply. But if it does reach that threshold, we have a mechanism to get people to address that hazard.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm thinking about this more as it applies to my last question was about existing homeowners, but more as it applies to new subdivisions. So let's say we have a environment specific for purposes of value. They want to leave really tall, the 150-foot tall trees as homes are built. And those trees are tall enough that they definitely will cover the roof line and create shade for homes. In a new construction, would our codes people need to say you can't have that tree because it overhangs the house, that older growth tree?
No. The only thing they would have to do is once the house is built, just make sure that the lowest limbs that are overhanging the tree are 10 feet above the roof. It doesn't say that they can't overhang. There just needs to be 10 feet of space between the lower limbs and the roof.
So a house will be completely under canopy, just way up.
Right.
Right.
And like I said, you want to leave limbs a few feet off of your roof anyway. You're probably a little more than doubling that space to hit the 10-foot mark, and that's all that's required. Not that they can't, it's horizontal distance between the roof and the limbs. Not that they can't be on the same vertical plane.
Boyd, are there objective criteria for determining what critical behavior is critically dangerous situations that where you can act? What are the objective criteria?
I think that would be like most situations that fire police and codes enforcement folks deal with, that they would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis and be able to identify and articulate what a particular threat is.
And people that heat their homes with wood don't have any heat source other than a wood stove or a fireplace or what have you. Their wood stack has got to be within, you got to keep it 30 feet away from the house, or is that again just a suggestion? Or
It's a recommendation. And basically where that came from was forestry, and the codes picked that up from insurance companies. If you look at most insurance companies will come out, or when they suggest that your wood pile be 30 or 25 feet away from the house, and not on a flammable, not on a wooden deck. But we see them all the time up here, whether it be on a concrete or a paper patio, within 10 feet of the house. It'd be nice if they had them further away, but it's convenience. But it's not going to be, it's not one of those things that's going to be prohibited for you to do. Insurance companies don't even like them. Let's say you have a covered porch, which where I grew up, we had a covered porch and around 3 sides of the house. And guess where we had 3 fireplaces in the house. And guess where our wood was? Up on our wooden covered porch. And, I'm sure nowadays the insurance company would cringe about that. But again, these are recommendations to assist people. Some people might not think about it. Maybe you don't want to put your wood pile over your dryer vent, which I've seen. And, it's just suggestions like that. And we do have some folks up here that have some nice, really nice wood piles.
So not to beat a dead horse here, but I'm a little bit confused on the clearances of 10 feet. So Boyd, you were talking about tree limbs over your house being okay as long as they were 10 feet higher than your highest roof point. Is that what I understood?
Over where they hang.
Right. There has to be 10 feet of horizontal clearance. So it's not, if you have a room that extends out from the house and there's a tree over that, and that's a single story, but you have another part of the house that's 2 stories, but no trees over it. The only thing you have to be 10 feet above the roof where that tree overhangs, not 10 feet above the total height of the house.
Okay, we may have some terminology misunderstanding. So on the page of the code that has the diagram with space, this page, under D, trees, tree crowns extending to within 10 feet of any structure shall be pruned to maintain a minimum horizontal clearance of 10 feet. Should that be vertical clearance?
I would think so.
Probably, yes. Yes. It's a vertical clearance. Well, I think probably what that means is as you have your roof, and if you did a horizontal line where the limbs are, they're talking about where that line meets should be 10 feet of vertical clearance on a horizontal plane. But I see where that could be difficult to understand.
But it just sounds to me as though that horizontal clearance should be replaced by vertical clearance by what you're saying.
We can make that change.
Well, let's be sure that's what you meant.
Well, I mean, it's basically, as Boyd said, it's wherever your roof, wherever the tree, the limbs at whatever point they hang over need to be 10 feet. So it's not your highest point of your roof. It's the overhang. So I don't know exactly how to, that could be seen in different ways.
You could just clarify by using the words above.
Right.
Well, and then that, like in Boyd's example, where you have a room off the side, and like your house, y'all have the porch and you have the upstairs. Well, the limbs that hang over the porch may be within that clearance, but they're closer to the second story within that horizontal plane, and that means you have to turn them back. And again, these are suggestions, not law. But when it comes into new subdivisions, that's where I think that people that want healthy, mature trees may have an issue.
I'm trying to see. I was trying to see in the states literature if they have a better definition of that. The state recommends, talking about firewood, that you be 30 feet away from the house. Recommended, not mandatory.
Yeah, and I guess I was looking at this from kind of a totality perspective and the way everything is laid out, but it seems to me if that's what they intended, tree crowns extending to within 10 feet of any structure shall be pruned to maintain a minimum horizontal clearance of 10 feet. If that's what they intended, it seems like they would just say that tree crowns cannot extend to within 10 feet of a structure. But
And then that gets back to the shading people.
right, that's what I'm saying.
Everybody loves that.
That's not how I interpreted it as Eric and I both have explained it. If that's in error, it doesn't make any sense. But
Are you understanding what I'm trying to
I
convey
understand
there?
what you're saying, yeah. That's what you're saying isn't how I interpreted it. But now that you've raised that question, I see exactly where you're coming from. But in Eric and I discussing it, that was our interpretation, was that it was a matter of if trees are at or over the house, they have to be trimmed 10 feet up. Just like the limbs of trees should be 6 feet above the ground. The idea is to not allow fire to transfer from lower fuels up into the tree. So you've got that separation. Same thing here with the trees. And it's not about, in this situation, it's not about the house setting the trees on fire, it's the other way around.
Sure. But that wording to me needs to be cleaned up, because to me it says the opposite of what you're saying. And then the other part about limbs located less than 6 feet above the ground, that's problematic for some of our small native trees like dogwoods. We have several dogwoods with limbs much closer than that to the ground.
Again, this isn't about making, it's, if you do that, then, the recommendation would, don't put it up next to your house. Not saying you can't, but that would be a recommendation.
So I understand what you're saying about whatever's existing at the time this is adopted is basically grandfathered in. Is that correct?
It would not apply to existing trees, residences.
So what happens if we plant some new trees
You can plant new trees.
and then they have to meet the code? Is that what you're saying?
We would like them to. Again, it's a prevention code.
But they would not be grandfathered in like the 100-year-old trees.
No.
Non-fire, excuse me, Ann.
No, go ahead, Barbara.
So the non-fire.
We lost you, Barbara.
Okay, what did I do?
I don't know. Keep talking.
I have been removed. You've been
No.
removed?
We
We
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Okay, it's the term non-fire resistant vegetation. That is as defined by burnsafetennessee.org. Is that?
Yeah,
Okay, shouldn't that be in there as defined by burnsafetennessee? to define some of these things? Because a lot of these things are open to interpretation.
Well, that is a strict recommendation. The reason we don't do that, that list I would look, there's a list of the more flammable, less flammable, but, that could change. This was developed in 17. That could change next week. I think that we use that as a recommendation, but usually we don't put things like that in codes that strictly limit us to one area. I mean, you may know more resources in regards to trees and shrubs that might have some different recommendations. So, I mean, you have a list of trees that you would prefer not to be planted, and some that you would prefer to be planted. Maybe that same list is could be developed or could be drawn on for something like this.
Thank you.
We can't hear you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Say that again.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. So Eric, I
Yeah.
thank you for sending out that packet, that pamphlet that has the recommended species. Could you tell us just now, though, whether that list includes any of the needle trees like pines, hemlocks, red cedar?
The more flammable category does include the eastern red cedar, the hemlock, Leland cypress, pine trees, yews, boxwoods, but it also has grass and azaleas and rhododendrons and mountain laurel on it. It's just the fact that they're a woodier plant and they're more flammable. Like the less flammable butterfly bushes, which surprised me being less flammable, but and monkey grass and crepe myrtles, flowering dogwoods are on the less flammable list, which is good for us. Magnolias, maples, hickories, oaks, redbuds, tulip poplars are on the less flammable list. So, so yes, the eastern red cedar is on, but we all know the cedar is a very flammable, very, very, very flammable tree. I was just looking here in the national code, and it says tree crowns extending to within 10 feet of any structure shall be pruned to maintain a minimum horizontal clearance of 10 feet. But
Well,
we can do,
clarify that. Clarify that. I mean, I know that's what it says, but as far if these are suggestions and, it's not code law that you've got to do this, I mean, we need to clarify those two things right off the bat.
yeah, I think you're right. That does need, and I have lived my career with the codes, and I don't necessarily agree with all of their wording sometimes. It's confusing and left to interpretation. Sometimes that's what they want. But I think we need to maybe reword this section just a little bit to make it more clear on what it exactly means.
And I would suggest maybe let everybody, it's a suggestion, it's a recommendation, that it's not law, because again, we've had this meeting because the first time we read through it, it seemed like everybody had to cut down their trees or trim their bushes within, 10 feet of an electrical wire and everything else coming through. So let it be known it's recommendations, not law or code.
Rob, you're muted.
Is there someone from the state that could clarify that? Because looking through the materials that you gave us the reference to, there's some inconsistency with what the state has out there now. There's some places that talks about 10 feet, and then it talks about chimneys. Another place it talks about 15 feet and talks about chimneys again. And then if your house is on a slope, those numbers decrease even more. So
And it,
there's someone
right,
in the
it-
state that could clarify that for us?
I can actually have somebody from the state come. We're not adopting. We're not, if we wanted to become a Firewise community, we would adopt their plan as presented.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing is we're presenting a chapter in our fire code with some prevention measures.
Okay, so we will not be a Firewise community when these are implemented.
No.
Okay, I mistook that then when we started talking. I was thinking that was where we were heading.
No, we would have to adopt.
Sevierville and Gatlinburg and those others have done.
Yeah, there's probably 30 or 40 communities across the state that have adopted and have become Firewise communities,
Mhm.
or counties have adopted it as a whole.
Okay,
And,
but there are enough out there that have adopted that we could see if how they've implemented that horizontal versus
yes,
vertical clearance. Okay.
and again, I can speak because I talk to them on a regular basis, the chiefs from like Sevierville and Pigeon Forge, and I've never heard them mention making people go out and
Yeah.
so
So
cut
how do-
trees off their house.
How do we capture that as a follow-up item? Would that be for the town council to follow up with, or would that be for this tree board to follow up with?
I'd like to say that as, again, as one council member, it would be very welcome to have a recommendation either for or against adopting this portion of the code from the tree board.
Okay. So if we can get that information brought back to us on the clarifying that clearance, then that would give us an opportunity to go forward with that understanding and be able to communicate it if we get asked that same question.
Right.
We can do that, and in looking at some illustrations of this, and I think Ann may be right on this, it might actually, from a shade and cover perspective, be better the way you're thinking about it, because if that's what it's talking about, then you have a vertical wall, let's say, then tree canopy should be 10 feet away from that. But once you get to the roof line, then if you're looking at horizontal separation, there's nothing to be separated from once you get above the roof. So I think you may actually, the tree may actually, in this scenario, as long as it's 10 feet away from the structure, once you get above the roof line, it may be allowed to be even closer than what we anticipated.
Yeah, because another place on the state thing, it talks about removing trees and limbs that are actually touching the roof, but in another pamphlet they send out, it goes more into the distance standpoint. And it may be, like someone said earlier, following the diagonal of the roof line.
And if it's truly the horizontal plane that you're looking at, that would make sense, because if that changes with the roof line, then that distance is going to change.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
Eric,
I think
Good call, man.
both ways you're looking at creating a safe separation. But if.
Yeah, it's
Right
just
on
being,
this.
being able to communicate it and communicate it consistently.
Eric, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So sorry about that, Boyd. You were about to speak.
No, that's right, go ahead.
I hate Zoom. If the tree board wanted to suggest some wording that would make it easier for people to understand, do they have the option to do that before they make a recommendation to the council?
I think that's the way our committees and everything are supposed to work.
Right. What I would think, if we were trying to get the full tree safe verification, they couldn't, but that's not what we're doing.
That's why we've written our own chapter.
That flexibility was really the driving force behind doing it this way. We're not adopting the wildland urban interface code. We're creating our own chapter that helps us accomplish the same type of thing. But we have the ability to customize it as we feel appropriate.
But they're still just recommendations.
As to existing conditions, yes.
At this point.
But they're not just recommendations for new homes and new subdivisions.
Right.
And you hesitate to say this sometimes, but there has to be some common sense associated with the application, in that if somebody's going to plant a tree, there's going to be a significant period of time through a growth process that tree's canopy is probably going to be closer to the house than it needs to be until it reaches a height so that canopy is above the house, not adjacent to it. And those things like that, and that's why I said you have to just, the folks that are charged with enforcing what is enforceable, and determining what is a significant hazard and what is not, you got to just trust them to do that, because we're not going to go out with strict application letter of the law. You would never be able to get a tree grown to maturity anywhere near your house. So you just know that going in, and you work with builders and say, look, when you're going to plant these trees, here are the things you need to think about. And then you understand that over the course of the next several years, that process is going to play out.
Is there a way to have a narrative that explains that, Boyd? Because, and again, I think we're fine now, but as your code enforcers are talking to people who have specific questions, can I plant this tree? A simple answer is you have to have 10% horizontal distance. Well, that may not actually be the case for that tree if it's 7 years old, as opposed to when it's, freshly planted.
Right, and I think that's the answer, is that, there are other things like in the landscaping ordinance. I think it talks about planting a tree. You look at what that tree is going to be like at maturity.
Right.
And I think that's the answer is, okay, when you plant this tree, you need to think about what it's going to be like when it's mature.
Ideally, they'd save as many mature trees on property before they're building.
Right, and then they exist.
Right. But what you said earlier is also true, Joe. Sometimes people just take them down, then replant.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to have code that they couldn't do that so much.
Well, yeah, I guess that's not really what we're discussing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the fire code.
Yes, but it all fits together, unfortunately, and we have to try to think about different scenarios.
That's one of the things too, that through this code process in the revisions to our codes that we're going through right now, we'll have the second reading this month now, that it's already September. You know, we want to make sure that in the past, there's been a few places in our ordinances that contradicted the code that was adopted. And that's just by revisions, you know, they didn't adopt. And we've spent almost a year going through these to make sure our codes and ordinances dovetail with each other. So it takes the inconsistencies out of it. It makes it easier for folks to understand. I mean, if you go through and look at the landscape and look at the ordinance and, you know, in the pruning and clearance side, it talks about, you know, you make people prune trees off a sidewalk or back from a sidewalk or back from a corner. This is just basically the same thing. It's just off your house so it doesn't catch on fire.
So I had a couple of other questions just to help me understand what the idea is here. In the definition section, we've got the defensible space, which I think is defined in your diagram as being 30 feet from a structure. But the definition is an area either natural or man-made where material capable of allowing a fire to spread unchecked has been treated, cleared, or modified to slow the rate and intensity of an advancing wildfire. And here's my question: to create an area for fire suppression operations to occur. What does that really mean?
It means it gives us space around the house to put your fire out.
Bring in a fire truck. They could bring in a fire truck if they ruin your plant. Well, so be it, you know.
You know, that's why we have, you know, in the fire code, there's built-in provisions for being able to access a structure, whether by a, you know, fire access road, a driveway. And in the fire code, it talks about, you know, trees have to be trimmed 12 feet above the surface of the road, so a fire truck can get under it. And so basically what that means is, you know, when we get up to a house, we want to be able to get around the house to operate. And we have a few that's going to be difficult because there's nothing behind the house but open space over the brow. You can't do anything about that though.
So again, let's say that our house here in Old Town were being built right now and it's not going to get grandfathered. So we have 30 feet to the side property lines. Does that mean that you would need to have full access to get a fire truck in through that 30 feet?
No.
No,
Okay.
fire personnel.
Yeah, personnel.
Can get not equipment. And it talks about things that trees and stuff are allowed in that defensible space. They just need to be placed in of a variety that improves the ability to defend your house from a adjacent wildfire.
So I could still have my oak tree in the side yard that would prohibit getting a fire truck through?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
We buy a lot of fire hose, so if we can't get
Exactly.
we can get the fire truck close. and
As long as we can get close, we'll get
Fire
there.
personnel can get around the house, we're good.
I'm good too. I would really want them to be able to do that.
And again, we're not talking about, there's nowhere in here that says you have to have a nice green space around 30 feet around your house. You can still plant. It's just do it wisely.
That should entail offering recommendations for wisdom, for wisely doing it.
And I would have to defer because I'm not a arborist. But that's why we look at these things, these, more flammable, less flammable, we can guide people and you make recommendations, the tree board makes recommendations on, trees to plant less, favorable trees, more favorable trees. So that's where I think that's the direction where you would greatly help people make some good decisions.
So also thinking about going back to this canopy idea and the 10 feet between crowns. One of the things we enjoy so much here in Old Town particularly is the tree shaded streets, because the trees are really almost meeting in the middle.
Again, this addresses existing is okay. This we're talking about.
Right, but what does that mean in terms of a new subdivision, say, where they want to duplicate that at some point?
Over a street, we would defer to what our pruning and clearing section in the landscape ordinance already says. It already says in there how far a tree has to be pruned back from a street and off a street. This doesn't have anything to do with streets, it's just structures. The landscaping, it talks about sidewalks and streets already. And we're not changing or affecting that at all.
And they're already 12 feet above for clearance of fire trucks or whatever comes through.
Yeah, does that affect though trees that go up 30 feet or 50 feet and then come over the street?
No, that's what I said. They're 12 feet
No.
of clearance. There's 12 feet of clearance. between-
Yes, Joe, I'm asking, that's what we have now in terms of the landscaping and the street clearances. But with adding this fire code, would the trees be able to meet if they were 30 feet up?
This doesn't have anything to do with streets or open spaces like that. It's just in structures, around structures. Basically, what we're worried about is 30 feet around a structure. And 30 feet, if you look at our subdivision regulations, and everything with our setbacks, 30 feet isn't that far for new development. But if you have an area, let's say in Old Town, where they're gonna build a new house on an existing lot of record, and those trees go up and out over the street, those trees are gonna go up and out over the street, just like they do today.
Okay, I'm not finding it just right off the top, but there was something about roads where you were taking apparatus and
That's
cutting.
Access
back.
roads,
Yes, 10
that's already in the
feet.
fire code. That's just wording out of the fire code. It's called fire access road. The code's very clear on what a fire access road has to be and the
Here we-
standards it has to meet.
It's 7-405.7 vegetation control and clearance. What would be the portions of fire apparatus access road and driveways that would have to be cleared within 10 feet on each side? What does that mean, a portion of?
So we only have a few fire access roads in town. Basically, they're long driveways. Revenuers Lane out off Shackelford Ridge, that's considered to be a fire access road. So it has to be maintained. There's a few driveways in town I'm talking driveways that are over 1,000 feet long. They're considered fire access roads. So we're not talking about your normal driveway. It's extremely long lanes or private roads is what we look at. And that's been in the fire code for years. And it's basically the wording in this is taking directly out of the fire code and mirrors it exactly. So we're not talking about a normal driveway by any means. I mean, not even a long driveway, but it would be, what I mean long, say 100 feet. I'm talking about 5, 6, 7, 800 feet where you actually have to get a truck up on the driveway. Like I said, we have a few that are over 1,000 feet long in places. And some, again, I'll use Revenuers Lane as an example. It's, you know, it's got several houses on it and it's considered a fire access road, a private driveway / fire access road.
So going back again to the wildland urban interface areas, I'm still not real clear, sorry to be a bit dense, on what those are. I mean, could it be the whole town, basically?
No, not even our whole town is in the area. It's the more wooded areas of town. Again, we can identify it. It's hard to do from these maps. We can do it. And I'll take the commercial area on, you know, Taft Highway. That's not included. There's some parts of different subdivisions that aren't included. But we have a high percentage of the town that is included in that. And we can definitely identify those a little closer.
If you could send us some maps where you've maybe highlighted the areas that you would consider interface areas.
Yes, I can get those.
That would be great. One of the things I've tried to puzzle through is whether areas bordering currently undeveloped private land would then be considered interface areas. And from what you're saying, I'm hearing yes, they would be.
Yes. Basically anything undeveloped adjacent to a developed area would be considered interface area.
So if we take Wild Ridge as an example, where the houses are built close together on purpose to leave a lot of green space, then all of that green space is considered, well, and the houses themselves, I guess, that's all interface area?
Yes, they are in the interface area. It's I was trying to think of areas that aren't included, and I can't think right off the top of my head, but we can get that.
Matt,
we got maps already.
Question, Eric.
Yes.
If Wild Ridge was being developed today, would it be able to be developed exactly the same way?
Yes, this wouldn't prevent anything that's been done out there. They've actually, if you go out there and look, the trees that were left around the houses have been trimmed up. Yeah, it wouldn't prevent anything that's been done out in Wild Ridge.
Thank you.
Oh, and another specific question. If the 8 acres behind the shopping center where they had proposed the food city, so that is 8 acres of forest. So that and all the houses around it in the residential area are interface area?
I would have to look, but they could possibly be, yes. I know the shopping areas are not, and I don't know exactly where the line goes through there on the map. It's not an exact science. You can't I wouldn't call it exact. Basically, it's, you know, by looking at maps and different things that they've determined that. Satellite imagery and that type of thing that they use.
Well, that is a question that kept going through my mind. In 7-403.2.A, talking about the interface designation declaration, it says the wildland urban interface areas shall be based on findings of fact. So I wasn't real clear what that meant. Is there a list of criteria? What are they? What are the facts? And who makes that decision?
The information I've got so far has been made actually by the forestry department, and that's usually who determines those things. We just don't have the tools and the people to do it. They have the experts, they have the foresters, they have the mechanisms, they have the software, they have the data, and that's what we rely on.
Excuse me, Eric, but just looking at some stuff last week, there's a lot of quite complicated modeling that goes in, looking at climatic conditions, looking at the prevalent winds during the seasons, when your dry seasons are, when your wet seasons are, how fire may follow present stream routes under a drought, and all that stuff is included in these models. So it's not just one set like a list, you go down and check things off. I think when Eric gets the official maps from the Forestry Service, that you'll see that it's more like a mosaic, or at least the ones I saw that had examples of were more like a mosaic laid out within your terrain, and also versus where your prevailing winds come from, that will tell you where your highest potential for fire is under the right conditions.
You know, is one of the areas that's, I don't lay awake at night thinking about it, but it's high on my anxiety list, is the area from Suck Creek Road to the back of Alexian.
Right.
We have several fires a year that happen down along Suck Creek Road. Walls Ridge Emergency Service, you know, they're down there several times a year. And we've had several that have come up quite a ways, but, you know, you take in the fall or winter, you know, after the leaves have fallen and everything, it wouldn't take much, a windy day, if you said, depending on which way the winds are blowing. That is one of my nightmares, that, you know, a fire would come right up that creek. And
we had a set of fires in the late 90s or right around 2000 that did come quite close to Alexian, and
Right.
that's where they started, and they burned around that side of Suck Creek and up through the Prentice Cooper property, and then burned over into the Middle Creek Gorge, and were burning on that side that Alexian Village is on.
And that's a concern. That's, you know, a
Yeah,
great
'cause it's
concern.
facing the right direction under the right drought conditions, and like you say, most time things burn uphill, not all the time, but lots of the time. So yeah, I can see we have a lot of areas, so especially on the perimeter of town, that might meet a lot of those conditions under the right climatic and seasonal conditions.
And that goes to, thanks for that, Rob. That goes to another thing that has been going through my mind. What is the interface between the town of Signal Mountain and the surrounding areas?
You mean well, we can't, you mean what's our options with, like?
Well, I'm sorry, let me clarify. What are surrounding governmental entities doing, and what are their wildfire plans? How does that interface with what you're looking at here?
I know the county as a whole is looking, and I think the mayor was at a meeting with the mayors, maybe it was a year ago, where they were talking about the wildland urban interface and mitigation in the county. Is that correct? Dan, you remember that?
Yes.
And,
Yes, go ahead.
and I know the county is creating maps, again, as part of the mitigation plan, and they've looked at it. You know, Hamilton County as a whole has several some people will call them wildfires. What I think of a wildfire, I think of a bigger event, but very large brush fire, several acres. We had one not, Walls and Ridge Emergency Services helps us, we help them, but out in the Lone Oak area, it doesn't sound like a lot, but you get a 5 to 7, 8 acre fire. That's a pretty good fire, and we have those several times a year up here, out in the county. We had one here out off Timberlinks. It was a 2 acre fire last fall, so we're not into it. We had one this spring out on Palisades over the brow, which got pretty close to some houses. We were able, and it started out on the W road. Some people were doing things out on the W road, and that's how far it traveled. So, I think everybody in the counties, we've had it before. In 2016, we had the Flippers Bend fire, which affected Boston Branch. We had crews coming from all over Texas, Utah. We had an incident management team from Florida come up and manage the incident. I mean, it was a significant fire. And so we're not immune, but we want to do everything we can to, I've always tried to live my life and not be a statistic, and I don't want us to be a statistic or make the national news.
Sure, I was just wondering if there are interfacing plans with adjacent area emergency services.
No, not anything other than, what we have for mutual aid plans. There's no, the county's working on a plan as part of the mitigation plan, but there's nothing necessarily in place yet. And most every places I look at, and again, I'll use Sevier County as an example. Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, and Sevierville and Sevier County adopted the same plan. That way they, it's the same plan. And they actually adopted, they are FireWise communities, and they are recognized nationally as FireWise communities too. So they went to that extent. But after the fire they had, I can understand that. And you don't want to be, we're trying to be a little proactive here. We don't want to be reactive on any of this. So that's why we're trying to get out, do what we can now.
Does everybody get their questions answered so far? And we're going to get these terminologies changed. We're going to get the maps and go from there.
Yes.
And you're muted.
Thank you. I have a number of smaller questions that I wonder if I might email to Eric and just ask you to answer. I mean, they're detailed things. I don't want to bore everybody to death. I don't want to be that person.
Anytime. Be happy to answer them.
So if I could send you an email and just ask you to answer this list of details, would that be okay?
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any?
Anybody, if you have any questions, shoot me an email and
Okay.
get you the answers for everybody.
May I ask just a tree board question?
Sure.
Do you anticipate that you will have any modifications to us by our next meeting, which is 2 weeks, 2 more weeks on the landscape ordinance?
You
Yes.
should already have that.
I think there should be some modifications that just came into my mind.
On the
landscape
landscape?
ordinance. Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
So what you think there's more questions on the landscape?
No, there are things that need to be more clarified. That came
Yep.
to my mind, and we'll discuss it at a meeting, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
And while we're talking about that, do we want to set up a date for that meeting to try to move things along so we can get it to the town council?
Sure.
Because if we wait for our next regular meeting, that's almost a month away.
Okay. What's a convenient time for everybody?
I couldn't hear you, Barbara.
When is, does someone like to suggest a date or time? It won't take long. I only have 2 items that I need to address.
I prefer something after 5, just to accommodate my
Okay.
work schedule.
Okay.
We should be able to do that.
If
You have-
you've only got 2 items, Barbara, could we go ahead and just do it now? While we have everyone together?
I think, is
And
everyone
let
here?
Boyd and Eric go
Thank
ahead
you.
and go?
I'm sorry, I have a couple of things as well, Rob, that I'd like to put together in some coherent form.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you have a particular day of the week you prefer?
Not really, just I prefer something not during the workday.
Sure, sure. How about you, Rob?
I'm good. Any time after 5's good, any day.
Okay, I don't want to speak for the whole tree board. I'm okay with after 5, but what about you guys?
5:30, good?
Yeah,
Okay, let's schedule them at 5:30.
With
Okay,
that,
And I will send an email out with my 2 changes or additions so that they can be thought about and we can get through quickly. And I'm sorry to do this to you all.
I will do that too. Thank you, Barbara. Do we
Okay.
want to go for late next week or the early in the following week?
I'm kind of busy next week. It's the week of my birthday. And
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
I have a birthday coming up too, Barbara.
how about that?
Happy birthday to you too.
Happy birthday, Jennifer.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. How about, like Tuesday or the 15th or 16th? Or Wednesday, the 16th, or Thursday?
Yeah, Wednesday would be better for me. Ada has a cross-country meet on Tuesday.
Okay, Wednesday, go, Joe, I'm sorry.
all right, Wednesday, the 16th, 5:30.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you,
All right.
Joe.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Boyd, for
Thank
sitting
you,
there.
Thank you. I
everybody.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all your time.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
man.
guys. Thank you.
All right.
Are we done?